If you haven't noticed, Paul decided we're starting. Good afternoon, everyone. For those that I don't know, I'm Michele Acuto. I'm Provost Chancellor for Global Engagement at the university here. So welcome to those of you that traveled from afar or close by for this. I'll keep it super brief because it is Paul's and the panel's show. It was just a chance for some housekeeping. I'm basically the housekeeping here. Number one, if there are fire alarms, they're not real. And this is an old building with a lot of, as you can imagine, wood. So the exits are clearly marked. Make your way down the stairs. If you can't make your ways down the stairs, come and find me or come and find someone of the team and we'll escort you out safely. Toilets and facilities are downstairs, down the stairs. Again, flag if the stairs are a problem. Big building with big stairs. There's facilities on this floor as well. We wanted to get a chance for putting together 3 universities and having a conversation informed by the Africa Charter and the work that the Perivoli Africa Research Center is doing in Africa. So this was a pretty auspicious moment for us to get us chatting publicly and then chatting privately as well on how we make this meaningful. It's a particularly important one for me. We were joking just a couple of days ago with Mosa and Evelyn that Africa was one of the reasons that brought me to Bristol, but I genuinely mean it. And this is our chance to sort of commemorate in a positive ways and looking forward on how the work that we're doing with the center, the work that Isabella and Leon are leading and the team are leading with colleagues in Africa is being advanced and how we make meaningful steps in that direction. So we structured this conversation around that. We are really grateful that Lord Paul agreed to chair. We're doubly grateful because I understand that you were already a windhoek at the kickoff of this, and it's a chance for us to say thank you for the support on that front to you, and thank you to the support to UCT and UNISA for being great partners on the continent. I'll leave it at that. We have a busy round of questions and conversations. I hope everyone enjoys it. Again, thank you everyone for turning up. Paul, all yours.
Thank you very much for that, Professor Acuto, and thank you to your team for making all of this possible and bringing us all together. Now, I am pleased to be a graduate of Bristol. This building has huge memories for me of dread and trepidation in terms of trudging my way up to the faculty on at the beginning of Freshers Week, but also moments of great joy and happiness too. But I went to university here, but had it not been, you say, Michelle, you're here partly because of Africa. Well, I'm certainly here because of events in Africa, because had it not been for a coup d'etat in my home country of Ghana, I would have gone to the University of Lagos. But there was a coup, we were refugees, and I ended up here and have never regretted that aspect of the coup. But in the country in which I was brought up, by way of introduction to an assembly, distinguished assembly, such as this, the linguist who speaks on behalf of the chief, which is you in this case, Vice Chancellor, doesn't ask for names and for titles, for offices held, doesn't even ask you about your family, which for those of us who are from Africa here, we all know, don't we, that whatever we achieve in life, we are always our parents' son or daughter. That's just the way that it can be rather galling if you become a distinguished academic, a vice chancellor, or a cabinet minister. You're always Kwaku Boateng or Ellen Boateng's son or daughter. They don't even ask you your family name. They ask you one question, and one question alone, by way of introduction. Does anyone here know what that is in our Akan tradition? Nope. Well, they ask you this: why are you here? Why are you here? Which, if you think about it, the answer to that question is the best possible introduction. And we're here, aren't we, because we believe that higher education matters. We believe that Africa matters, that relationships between peoples and continents matter, that development matters. That's why we're here. And that's why this agenda around Africa research, the relationship between the UK and Africa, the Africa Charter, that's why it's so important. If we are to deliver on the SDGs, universities, research must play their role, not just in terms of education for all, but right the way across the piece, particularly in terms of addressing the inequality, the bedevils, not just the continent of Africa, but also our world, not just individual countries, South Africa, Ghana, but also the UK and its constituent parts. Inequality is the major issue of our times. It's inequality that has led to a situation in which now all over the world, parties are being elected into office who don't actually have much time for higher education and who don't actually have much time for evidence-based policy. They have another agenda. And it's an agenda that makes the role of educational institutions and civil society in terms of pursuing the Sustainable Development Goals that much more important. And this conversation, and it's going to be a conversation, which is why I've been told to make sure that I'm an absolute stickler for time, and I'll be interrupting and being quite heavy-handed, folks, in terms of keeping to the timetable. But I want it to be a conversation in which all of you in all of these tables feel engaged and are a part. And it's not just a question of listening to four folk behind a table. So thank you all for being here. Huge thank you to our distinguished panel. And we all know why we are here. And we have got three panelists today who will help us in this conversation. Professor Segalo, Professor Moshabela, and of course, Vice Chancellor Professor Welch. And I'm going to ask you, if I might, each of you, from your particular perspectives, to kick us off with your sense of why it is that the Africa Charter, the transformative agenda that it encapsulates, why at this time is it so particular in terms of Africa-North cooperation, in terms generally of the impact of research on development, and where are we in terms of equitable research partners? So in no particular order, why don't you kick us off, Vice Chancellor?
Thank you. It is an honor to have you as one of our alumni and indeed one of our alumni award holders. It's also great to welcome everyone here and to welcome my colleagues on the panel. And Mosa and I actually spent almost 4 days together in Hong Kong discussing very similar issues about why are we here, what are universities for, but from a global perspective. And I was reminded every day why the Africa Charter for Equitable Partnerships is so essential now. Some African universities are doing fantastically well. When I went to UCT and to Pretoria, you get toured around facilities which are the envy of any UK university. And so isn't everything fine? Isn't everything, our job has been done some time ago? Well, far from it. And we're really only just at the start of that beginning, because understanding the assumptions we hold, understanding the systemic inequalities that are built into international global funding systems, understanding how careers are shaped by global systems rather than local systems, is something that really behoves us at a place like the University of Bristol. And you alluded to it, Paul, but the shattering breakup of a global trade system, of a global knowledge system, where the US can pull some of the most important global funding through US aid, where the UK can downgrade its collaborative research funding on a global basis, reminds us just how fragile that global world of knowledge is, and how we as fellow universities actually have to hold it, knit it, keep it knitted together when all around us looks so tumultuous. So this is something that we are absolutely committed to, recognizing that sometimes equitable partnership lies in the tiniest decisions as well as in the largest conversations.
Thank you very much indeed for that. Professor Segalo, you hold the Albert Luthuli Research Chair. Your focus of your research over many years has been on historical trauma, the everydayness of gendered suffering, and you've managed in your work to popularize science in a way that many never actually succeed in doing. What's your take on this from UNISA's perspective and from your own perspective as a distinguished African academic?
Thank you very much, and thank you, colleagues. And I think just drawing from what you were saying, Evelyn, the importance of the moment that we're finding ourselves in, how we think about knowledge production within this particular moment that we're finding ourselves in the world. I think the many traumas, as you were saying, when I link it to my work, that people are confronted with when we look at the inequalities, the conflicts that are there in the world, how does that fit into our role as institutions, I think is also very, very important. It's critical to highlight these moments that we are in right now, the tremors that are there in the world right now, the geopolitical volatility that we see. And I think it is really an opportune moment to think about the transformative agenda in the work that we're doing as institutions, as we're alluding to the issues around funding and what that means in terms of us being able to stand on our own as institutions, but to also think about the importance of working together, working collaboratively, if we are to see a change in the world, and if we were to really reimagine knowledge production and the ecosystem of knowledge production, to understand that when we're working collaboratively, looking at different sides, so the so-called global north and the global south, and the importance of working in partnerships that then assist us to be able to respond to the inequities that we're finding, but to also understanding that sides of knowledge production reside in different parts of the world. And when we get to a point where we understand that, I think then we can realize that there actually is more that we can do if we work collaboratively. And the Africa Charter aims to lead us towards that direction, to say that for a very long time, there has been an assumption that knowledge production only resides in a particular space, in a particular region. However, that actually is leading to us missing out on so much in terms of what we can do as institutions of higher learning in our partnerships, in our collaboration. So the rethinking that is necessary is what the Africa Charter espouses for. It calls us to do, to say, let's look at all these inequalities as they appear in all these different levels, and not only looking at the symptoms in terms of who publishes with who is the first publisher, but to actually look at the very core of these inequalities. And this is where we speak about our very policies as institutions that require a rethinking, the resources that need to be in place, that if we want to see this change, if we want to see a balanced ecosystem, we have to be deliberate in ensuring that we also provide resources for this change to be possible. And I think the transformative agenda will speak to that, or for us to reach a transformative space would require us to pay attention to all these issues.
Thank you very much for that. Professor Moshabela, you are a medical doctor. You lead a great world university as Vice Chancellor of the University of Cape Town. You came into office in the aftermath of the greatest public health crisis in our living memory, COVID. I happen, though, when I was High Commissioner, to have come across your work in relation to HIV/AIDS and that crisis, of which South Africa was very much on the front line. What's your take on where we are now in terms of this transformative agenda?
Thank you very much, Lord Paul, and greetings, everyone. So I think Lord Paul said that one of the key questions is, why are we here? But I also want to share with you one of the things that we often say when we greet. Predominantly in the province of KwaZulu-Natal, we say, Sawubona, Sanbonan, means that we see you. And I tell you about this because I think we can be here, but talk past each other and not even recognize or see each other, not even remember that we cross paths. And in a world where there's so many crises that we are dealing with, so many challenges in many fronts, complex problems, intractable problems, wicked problems, it's so easy for us to want to withdraw into those safe comfort spaces so that we don't have to feel the stress and the anxiety of the troubles that we are confronted with. But Lord Paul also said earlier that, oh yeah, it was a coup, but it was great. Like, here I am. And I'm listening to him and I'm thinking, shush, that's an interesting it's an interesting perspective to have around a coup, to actually see the good in something that is a crisis or a problem. And that speaks to the resilience of the human spirit. And these are not things that we talk about. You know, when we come together to talk, we talk about the science, we talk about the papers, talk about our teaching programs, and these things are important. Don't get me wrong. I lead a university, and I understand that this is the core business, core mission of what we do. But we came out of COVID into a space where all of a sudden people care a lot about their mental health and their well-being. People want to have some flexibility in hours. People want to be able to work from home. People want to work remotely. Our students are different now. They have different expectations to students of 10 years ago. But as universities, because we are quite archaic and it's difficult for our spaces to change and adapt, we still want to do things the same way that we know how to do them. And yet the world is calling for us to be more agile, and to change. The problems that we are faced with in the world today that involve a lot of moral injury to a lot of people, we don't really know how to respond to them and how to adapt to them. COVID did that, caused a lot of moral injury, and we cope by just suppressing and moving on. We want to forget what happened. A lot of the things that are happening in the Middle East, things that we're seeing geopolitically around the world, they're challenging us, but we don't create spaces in universities for us to talk safely about these things. When someone says, look, I'm struggling, I'm having a hard time, to us, it means, well, it means you are weak, you can't cope with the pressure, maybe you want to look elsewhere. But that sense of humanity is also what people bring. But when people bring their identities through the door, we expect them to leave those identities at the door and come into a space where we are all the same, defined by a certain standard framework of what we understand an academic to be or a student at UCT to be. Then we fail to benefit from those different identities that people are bringing. So I think a transformative agenda challenges us to start thinking differently, to say, actually, those things that make us uncomfortable, those things that we want to shed off, things that we want to suppress or ignore, why don't we put them on the table? And the world today calls for that, Lord Paul. And that's what I've learned from these experiences.
Thank you very much indeed for that, Mosa. I mean, I'd like to take us on because you have talked about the impact of fragility and vulnerability and the need for us to recognize that in individuals. So very true. I wonder now if we can look at the fragility and vulnerability of the sector itself, because we have always envisaged, haven't we, that, and it's been a given, certainly growing up. I mean, I'm old enough to have been present at the birth of the nation of Ghana, the first independent sub-Saharan African state. So I remember the 6th of March, 1957, vividly, as a school child waving a flag when Princess Marina came and handed over the documents of independence to then Prime Minister Kwame Nkrumah. And at that time, of course, the great symbol of nationhood was the university, the University of Lagos. I remember the inauguration because I was present at it. My father was the first chairman of the council of the University of Science and Technology, Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology in Kumasi. The university was higher education was a given. In this country, at the height of the attack on Britain and on its Commonwealth and empire in the last World War, Winston Churchill held a gathering in the bomb-blasted, debris-strewn hall that was this place. And yet he felt it sufficiently necessary for him to be present when the nation was under attack at a university. Now, today, in this world, the university itself as an institution is under attack. One of the first things that they did in Mosul was the university. They went for it. Timbuktu, which President Mbeki has been so important in seeking to conserve and to raise up again, the first thing the insurgents attacked was the university. As we speak, Harvard University is under attack. in a variety of ways. Arguably, it must be said, the university funding in this country is, quotes unquote, under attack. So these givens no longer actually seem to be there anymore. It's not, universities are not necessarily seen as a public good that must be funded at all costs. So when you look at the challenges that the sector faces, what does collaboration mean in terms of addressing those challenges, and what more do we need to do? Professor Segalo, if I can turn to you first.
Thank you very much, Lord Boateng. One of the things that came to mind as we were talking about university and its importance and access to university, it immediately took me back to what we had in South Africa around 2015 with the Fees Must Fall movement, which was also about the importance of access to education, of students not wanting to be excluded because they cannot afford to be able to enter university or to pay for university. But in addition to that, it was also about curriculum. And this is where I think the Africa Charter also becomes very important. That the kinds of knowledge and the theories and methodologies within university spaces forces students and sometimes even academics to forget who they are when they enter university spaces and take on a new identity that will make them legible when they enter universities. And it begs the question, who are the universities for then? And so students came in with that idea. And I think it's very important that with the charter, it's also about epistemologies, which at the core of it is really about knowledge, about cosmologies, about worldviews, which are at the core of who we are as a people and how we make sense of the world. A few points that I want to make, maybe just around the institutions as well, is that we're witnessing a reconsolidation of the global North dominance in this moment. And this has a profound impact on Africa specifically, and the institutional collaborations and partnerships. So we need to ask ourselves, what does all this mean for the partnerships in this moment that we're finding ourselves? But it also then affects the shaping of the research priorities that we have, the funding flows that we have, and the epistemic gatekeeping that we often have. If we think about publishing, who publishes and where, and who decides what can be published. So epistemic gatekeeping is also at the core in terms of what institutions stand for and what they're about. So the cuts to university funding, the development aid, the trade wars that we see, and the diplomatic standoffs that we now observe so much in our media, and also the threatened withdrawal of funding that you've mentioned also, for example, when we look at Harvard University, the US aid funding that I think as a continent, we've really felt the pinch of it. All these things have created new forms of precarity that requires us to really rethink where we are as institutions. So as African institutions, already navigating, because it's not new for us, already navigating this structural underfunding, this then becomes more and it becomes worse. We are expected to adapt, we're expected to absorb what is happening, and we're expected to also accommodate these global shifts without question. So what does this mean for us? For us, we see it as an opportunity, I think, as the continent, but also as institutions within the African continent. It gives us the opportunity to look inward, right? To say, where are we and what is it that we can do with the resources that we have? What can we put on the table? Because we've seen that this level of dependency to some extent puts us really at a very precarious position. So there's a need to come together in partnerships, in collaboration, and seek ways to find a transformative way and not feel stuck or paralyzed, I believe, by the global restlessness that we see around us. So collaborations and partnerships where we work together, where we share resources, becomes very important and very instrumental in us imagining a way forward based on the moment that we find ourselves in this current moment.
Mosa.
Yeah, it's a tough question because in some ways to understand it, one has to think historically as well, as you've already started doing, and also think prospectively into the future. I think as a sector and as universities, we carry legacies. And in those legacies, those historical legacies, there are good things and bad things. But oftentimes we tend to just focus on the good things, and we don't acknowledge the bad things. As it is now, you ask yourself, when universities are under attack, who is coming to the defense of the universities? Who is coming to the defense? Because the people that value universities would come to the defense of the universities immediately. So if you're finding yourself under attack and no one is coming to your defense, then you have to ask yourself if you're relevant to society. When we, in the South African sector as a whole, experience the executive orders from the US and threats of funding cuts, we went to our government, and all the university vice chancellors and presidents met with several ministries that in a meeting that was led by the presidency. It was a confidential meeting, but I think it is worth saying that one question that was raised with us was, there've been so many engagements diplomatically, government, private sector, industry, because of trade and businesses and all of that, a lot of engagements. But universities were nowhere to be found in those rooms. So the question that they were asking us was, why do you think you were left out? I mean, it doesn't make sense to me why we were left out, because as a sector, we hold the brain trust of the country. Or so we think. Then they went on to say to us that, well, the answer is you lack societal legitimacy. I mean, look, as UCT, we tend to pride ourselves in being the #1 ranked institution on the continent. How can we lack societal legitimacy? But that becomes irrelevant when we are sitting in that room and they have to make decisions about how to allocate limited resources of the state. And the question is, are they going to give us a slice? They're like, well, we can assist you because you have asked, and we understand the importance of protecting science and protecting research. And I mean, we made a strong case. We gave them lots of examples about how the science in South Africa contributed to the fight against COVID. We gave them examples. We gave them examples about the science that helped to fight the floods and all of that. We gave them all these examples. They're like, yeah, we agree. So we will look and see how we can get you a slice of the cake. But we want you to do 3 things for us. We want you to work hard to gain societal legitimacy. We want you to actively engage in science communication. And thirdly, we want you to actively contribute to economic growth. Now, UCT, we are one of the biggest landlords. We are one of the biggest employers. We get a lot of funding directly from international donors and research funding bodies. But it's not enough in terms of having the youthful population that we have on the continent and how we are actively contributing to societal needs, if that youth does not feel the impact and the contribution of our institutions, not just those who come to us, but the youth in society, if they don't feel our presence, then we're not relevant to them. We become relevant to a small proportion. Lord Paul, just to say that for me, I think as a sector, we have to ask ourselves that question to say, what do we do to protect our legitimacy and relevance to society so that society can appreciate our presence and contribute in protecting us as a sector?
Thank you very much in that. Evelyn, Bristol Society, are we a legitimate?
So our license to operate is under question. And whether that is in Africa, whether that is in the US, whether that is in the UK. Interestingly enough, it's not under question in Asia. The notion that for China, for Hong Kong, for Taiwan, for Korea, for Vietnam, universities are the driver, just as they were for Ghana, sources of national pride and opportunities for the youth in those countries. So fascinating to see that contrast. That license to operate, I think we can regain through the Africa Charter together, but only by doing it together with our local communities. One of the events we ran last year, and it's a pleasure to have Sada Yerde here from Black Southwest Network here in Bristol, was we ran a sort of charter conversation with our local Black communities because of Bristol's heritage as a city and as a university. They're saying in terms of that partnership and co-creation and the changing notion of where knowledge comes from and how knowledge is defined and privileged, actually we need to link deep into our local communities as well as into our international partnerships. And the Charter as a framework works very well wherever there is an unseen power imbalance. So first we have to acknowledge it, and then we have to act on it, and that can be quite uncomfortable.
Yeah, I'd like to take that thought that you've shared with us, Evelyn, VC. I'd like to take it and ask the panel to move us forward in that regard, because when your comments really prompted it in my mind. When I think about examples of good practice in this area of digging down into communities and mobilizing for support, there was a very good one that developed in the 2005 period onwards between Leeds and Durban. Interestingly enough, it involved the Leeds universities, the Durban universities, the mayor in Durban, the local authority in Leeds, the Chamber of Commerce and the trade unions that directly linked civic development with the work of the universities and local businesses. So I wonder if you could think about how the university relates to civil society, to business, to the unions, how you relate to them in terms of delivering. Because, I mean, the days when we could simply look to government to take our irons out of the fire, it seems to me are gone. I don't, quite apart from, you know, how the world sees universities, resources are such that I don't think we're going to be able to turn to government alone. So how do we relate to businesses, to trade unions, to local government? And developing your thoughts about the East. Now, I've lectured at the university of Peking, as it's called, as it happens, in Beijing, the capital. And I have also witnessed a tension that exists in China and that also exists in India. The tension in China, which I have seen also through the work of encouraging debating in the English-speaking, and which the English-speaking Union does or did in conjunction with the English language newspaper China Daily, it is that there's a lot of evidence that shows that critical thinking is very important to economic success. And China wrestles with that. They wrestle with the notion of critical thinking. I have been, as Chief Secretary, present in Edinburgh in the immediate run-up to Gleneagles, when we gathered together globally education ministers to meet with finance ministers. And the then government of India, which actually is the same political party as the now government of India, had a problem about the engagement of non-government players in this particular area. They were worried about civil societies, not-for-profit engagement. At the same time, we see globally, and South Africa is a classic example of this, the importance, undoubtedly, of the BRICS nations in terms of the geopolitical situation and challenging, rightly, the hegemony of the West. Your comments on that? Why don't you kick off, Mosa?
Yeah, I think that the point that Evelyn makes about the East is very important. Whenever we are in meetings, the people that don't worry about the funding is China and some of the institutions from the East. We talk, everybody's got a problem with funding, but not them. I think they've done a good job of building strong relationships with their governments in ways that in our democratic societies, we may not agree or support. But we have long hidden behind the institutional autonomy, academic freedom principles, which protect the work that we do. But at the same time, they have positioned us as elite institutions that are removed from society. And now we have to fix that problem. And we know the model, we know the framework of the triple helix of government, academia, and industry working together if we want to impact society. We know this. Do we practice it? Not really. Because our endpoint, our value chain begins and ends within the university for the most part. Yes, there are some examples of colleagues who engage actively, but as a sector, we tend to isolate ourselves to protect our autonomy and our independence. But we are not sustainable this way. And you're absolutely right that we may not be able to rely entirely on government, but we have to still partner with government to a large degree, but also work closely with industry. And you are also correct that beyond that, we need a quadruple helix beyond the triple helix to also add civil society and communities. Because then, if that's how we can redesign our model going forward, we can be tied better into the key sectors in society. Right now, we are not effective in doing that. There are some examples that we could mention, but as a sector, we are not effective in doing that. So whatever research outputs we have, whatever innovation that we bring out, they tend to have a value of death. You know, they come out and they reach a certain point, then that's it. There's no way of continuing in the value chain to make sure that it translates into benefit for society or for the intended beneficiaries. Then what we are valued for then is to graduate students. And beyond the graduation, and even when we do graduate students, we are told they are not relevant for the sectors. So all of these things have complicated the way we are connected with society. And I think we need to really take on board, as part of this transformative purpose, the quadruple helix of engaging with key sectors in society.
Thank you. Evelyn, look, Bristol was a model of the Haldane ideal of a civic university. Wills, after whom this building is named, was a major industrialist.
Right.
Where is that tradition now?
So one of the things I think is so interesting about the University of Bristol, and I've been here for 3 years, is it was set up to be a practical, agile, quite radical anti-establishment university. And then they built this beautiful set of Gothic buildings to make it look just as like it had been around for hundreds and hundreds of years, disguising that sort of turning over of what a university was for. Mind you, when the Wills family founded the university, their £100,000 donation went for a professor of Greek, a professor of philosophy, and so all of the same traditional subjects, because you couldn't have a university without that very strong sense of being tied to that classical tradition. So I like to think that what that we have to sort of remind ourselves to be radical, because actually we get confused by the buildings around us and think that we dine as we would in Oxford or Cambridge. Actually, we can't afford that, and we don't have the space for it. And as far as I can tell, we sold our refectory to become the Brown's Restaurant in the 1980s. Whether that was a good idea or a bad idea, I don't want to comment. And so we carry with us myths of what a university is. And actually, I think this is where the Africa Charter can go beyond epistemologies and into practicalities. What does it actually mean for a spin-out arrangement? And we have Agnes Nairn with us here. Agnes, put your hand up, who has been very fundamental to the foundation of the Africa Charter and Park, working with them. And amongst our very first conversations were, could we support a spin-out in Somaliland, for example? So we're starting with the academic side. We can very rapidly get down into the nitty-gritty of intellectual property, spin-outs, venture capital, etc. And then you get your quadruple helix.
Thank you so much for that. Puleng, you hold the Albert Luthuli Research Chair.
Yes.
Albert Luthuli, interestingly enough, was one of Mahatma Gandhi's great lives. When he was living and working in Durban, he produced a series of 7 particular stories, which he published, called Great Lives. Luthuli was one of them. Luthuli is associated with, above all else, academically, with the University of Fort Hare. Fort Hare is a great Pan-African university, as well as being the crucible of liberation, arguably, in South Africa, certainly, and in the continent generally. So where does that lead you?
UNISA, as an institution, has got a very, I think, important history in the memory of South Africa as a country. Because many of the great leaders, as you say, many of the leaders who were imprisoned by the colonial apartheid regime studied through UNISA, right? So there is that history. But also the university is an open distance learning university, which then offers us as an institution the opportunity, going back to the idea of our role as an institution in society and working in collaboration with society. So many of our regional offices or campuses, if you will, are actually embedded in many parts of the country, some in some remote areas of the country, which gives that opportunity to actually work together with the communities. And in some parts we are doing that, but I think there's still more that can be done beyond that, as well as an institution. And not only within South Africa, but this goes outside, even in the continent as well, with a well-established region campus in Ethiopia and also in Eritrea as well, where we are working very closely, even with the government there. So talking about the importance of the relationship with the government and how we can work together. But I think it's important for us to go back to the university as an ivory tower and how our systems are put in place. And so if we're talking about the importance of transformative agenda, it's critical for us to look at ourselves as institutions in terms of how our structures also function, where research, tuition, and importantly so, are at the core of what we do as the university, but who are we doing that work for whose benefit? And then we have engaged scholarship, which is then given 5% or 10%. And the question is, therefore, one has to wrestle with, what is it that I do in society, working in collaboration with society, if I only have 5% of my time allocated to that? How can we reimagine, rethink an integration that even in your teaching, even in your research, the work that you do is embedded and in relationship with the community and the societies that we're working with? That way, it's an integral part of what we do, where you don't have to put aside 5% to be able to do that work. And that's a rethinking that we need to put in place, I think, as institutions, if we are going to rethink the work that we do. Centers such as the Albert Luthuli Research Chair are also very deliberate as a way of institutions to say, how do we do work that is linked to the philosophies and the ethos of these liberation stalwarts in the work that we're doing towards social justice? So as we work as the research chair in collaboration with other institutions that put up the memory of Albert Luthuli, that's a reminder of what we can do as universities as it relates to social justice. You go to Ghana, at the University of Ghana with the African Studies Center, it's very deliberate in terms of the Pan-African agenda in the work that the university does. And I think having all of this embedded within the university assists us at least to push forward the transformative agenda. And as you said, Evelyn, not just at the research level, but also how this transformative agenda can actually trickle down to our communities. University of South Africa this year is an integral part of the G20. And I think this is a very good example of how civic society, industry, the government, and academic institutions can be in partnership. And we've had a summit where all this engagement, all these different sectors come together to have a conversation to say, what do we imagine November to look like when the G20 sits together? What is the voice of academia? What is the voice of civic society? What is the voice of industry? And I think that is a good starting point to how we can reimagine a truly transformative ways of engaging and partnering with each other.
Thank you very much for that, and the emphasis on transformation through intentionality and focus. And it says something about an institution that is able to work happily with the governments of both Ethiopia and Eritrea simultaneously.
Yes.
That says something, and it's hugely important. Well, over to you now for a discussion. Now, let me just say one thing to you, please. I don't want you to feel that you need to make a point through asking some sort of convoluted question. If you want to make a point, stand up and make it short. If you want to ask a question, make it short. And dear colleagues up here, if you'd hold them in your mind, I'll come to you from time to time for responses, either to the points or to the question. Okay. Who's going to kick us off? Yeah, gentleman at the back. If you'd say who you are, first of all, and that will be
Hi, I'm Eric Herring, Professor at University of Bristol. Thank you very much for this important panel. So I'd like to know what you think our response should be to the current transformative agenda that we're facing, which is one of a far-right attack on universities, characterized by commitment to lies, disinformation, and opposition to everything we've been trying to achieve. We've been trying to hold ourselves up to these standards, and we berate ourselves for not achieving these transformative goals. But we have another problem, which is to what we're going to do about the far right attack on everything that we stand for as an institution. Thank you.
Thank you. Hold that. We'll come back to you. We'll take you two more, and then we'll come back to the panel. My brother.
Thank you for the wonderful panel. I'm Brian Neff from the University of Cape Town, and I wanted to ask about how another crisis on the horizon affects this agenda, and that's AI, and how we're responding to that. Thank you.
Thank you. One more. My brother. I'll be coming to Three Sisters next.
Yeah.
Just to warn you. Yep.
Yeah, it's interesting what J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States, said about the notion of globalization. That they actually thought that this is their concept and practice as the West. And they thought that countries like China in the global South and others would remain just the back door of manufacturing and will not have the aspiration to rise up the sophistication ladder in terms of production. And the question was asked earlier about why do we get an attack on the university, particularly from the right? But the question can also be put differently. Is it also possible, or is it also true, that some of our universities, both in the North and the South, have been at the center of conservative thinking, actually reinforcing conservative concepts, practices, and all of that? Some other old professor of mine used to say, the two most conservative institutions in the world is the church and the university.
Okay, so there you have it. An attack from the right, and then challenges of AI, and then what about the right globalization and the Chicago School? So who have a lot to answer for, in my view, but my view is neither here nor there. Over to you first.
Yeah, thanks, Lord Paul, and thank you for those questions. I think the AI question, it's relatively easier to answer in the sense that we are embracing it. It's inevitable. We have to embrace it. We have to participate in the process, both in terms of fundamental research and applied research, training, development, and building capacities, infrastructure, human capacity, all of that. We have to do that. But we also have to make sure that we guard our interests in terms of making sure that it remains a public good, accessible to all, and that we limit the commercialization of it that can go out of control, but also in terms of the safety issue and the ethics and governance of it, the risks that may come with it. We have to participate in the process. We don't know what the outcome is going to look like, but I think we have to be part of that journey to actually actively shape it. And I think we've accepted that. And all of us at UCT, we are setting up we've had a Center for 4IR that involves multiple universities, but we are setting up a large continent-wide AI institute that's going to be done with industry and government and other partners. So that's, it's not to undermine or underestimate the challenges there, but just to say that we are part of that process.
Thank you.
I was going to comment on the far right quickly, Lord Paul, just to say that I think, for me, I think it's a representation of where we are in society. It's not new, it's been building up for quite some time. And it's challenging the discourse. It's not a bad thing. In the same way that we embrace debate in universities, we kind of have to embrace the diversity of thought and the questioning in society. I don't like it, but actually I have to accommodate it. And it gives me an opportunity to also reflect. You have to just cut out the noise and focus on the substance of some of the questions that are being asked so that we can reflect honestly about them. These people also, we find them in many of our governance structures, be it council, be it parts of management and other parts of governance. We find these people and we have to accommodate that thinking. We must also just make sure that, especially coming out of COVID, even before that, when we were talking about alternative facts, but since coming out of COVID, there's been a strong anti-science agenda, not just attack on universities. It started with science in order to drive a different way of thinking about issues that we may not agree with. And we have to find a way of actually protecting science, but also creating space for debate and having effective ways of dealing with polarization of relationships, polarization of thought, polarization in society. We have to find ways of dealing with that. And that brings us back to the basics. And for me, those very basics are basics of Ubuntu. A sense of humanity, respect, compassion, kindness. These values become quite important, especially when we are talking about a transformative purpose. So let's make sure that we think about the moral erosion that we've suffered as a society and think about how to engage in the regeneration of that, and at the core of it, bring in our core societal values, which we ourselves have sidelined and ignored.
Thank you. Evelyn?
So I think the AI question, as you said, weirdly, is the easier side of it. Technocratic, scientific, actually global. The far right, so I'll challenge you on that. I wish it were just the far right. Genuinely. If it were just the far right, we could say, that's over there, tiny group, very noisy online, put some banners up, but actually they don't represent the broad consensus of our communities who genuinely believe in partnership, collaboration, opportunities, transformation through education. Unfortunately, the far right and the far left and the middle are all starting to say, what are you doing for me? I can see what you're doing for you, but what did you do for me yesterday? What did you do for me today? What will you do for my children tomorrow? And as we start getting into our current government, Jackie Smith wrote deliberately in the Telegraph. She chose the Telegraph, which is a conservative newspaper in the United Kingdom. And Jackie Smith is our Minister for Higher Education and Skills, but she's dropped the higher education bit and only calls herself the Minister for Skills now. She used it as an opportunity effectively to say, British universities for British young people, something that I never thought I would hear from a Labour government. So actually, the University of Bristol is a university for anyone who can succeed in who can grow, who can transform, who can do research, who can learn. And that narrowing down is something that I'm genuinely very worried about. Because then it will be Harvard for Americans, UCT for South Africans, and we will break all of the bonds that actually helped us be the people who are. I'm an immigrant. I came from Galveston, Texas, and New York City over here in the 1980s. Britain created my career. I don't want to see it. I don't want to see that opportunity taken away from the future.
But what did the Romans do for Britain?
Straight roads.
Exactly. Puleng.
Sure. No, I think my colleagues, I would agree with the points that have been raised. I think it's the issue of AI is something that the AI is something that is here, that we need to contend with and think about how we work with it. At UNISA, for example, we have what we call the 10 catalytic niche areas that really inform the agenda of the university in the work that we do in research. And the issue of digitalization, the issue of, fourth industrial revolution is at the core of it. And as part of the work that is done in that area, there is also a deliberate move to say, what is the role of AI? How does it fit into the spaces that we're doing? How do we respond to it? Which is very important. A colleague here in the room does a lot of work on Divine on AI and ethics. So AI and ethics, when we think about the human in the whole AI space, what does that mean? How do we work with it? What are the implications of AI? So I think those conversations are there. They're very important as we think about how AI is now part of our lives, part of how we function, and what is our role as institutions in terms of how we engage and we deal with AI. I think it's very important. And I think I'll just agree under the issues of the far right and lies and misinformation, but also what my colleague said earlier, around the conservativeness of our institutions, which has been the case for such a long time. And I think here again, importantly, the work of the Charter becomes very important in saying we need to dismantle and rethink the ways in which the universities have been functioning, and comfortably so, and to say what would it mean if we really think critically about the theories that have been put as the beginning and the end of what we think about when we say what counts as knowledge and what does not count as knowledge. So that idea of being conservative needs to be rattled and it needs to be unpacked. That becomes very, very important. So, and I think as institutions, as academics, our work is really to question, to critique. And so the ideas of mis or disinformation and the dangers of that is really at the core of the work that we're doing, that we need to always be grappling with. We come from South Africa, we know the dangers of that in this moment that we're finding ourselves in without going into it. And therefore, it's really important for critical engagements with these issues and what is being put in front of us, and not just accepting what comes our way as the truth without engaging with that. And that needs to also go even in the lecture halls as well. How do we teach students? How do we allow for critical engagements of whatever information that they are bombarded with is very important.
Thank you very much indeed for that. Well, I mean, I asked AI whether it was a challenge to universities. And I was told, while AI tools can enhance critical thinking, creativity, and authentic learning experiences, their implementation must be carefully managed to address over-reliance, inequities, and ethical concerns. But there you have it. That's what AI tells us that we have to recognize as the challenge it represents to universities. Right. Over to you. Oh, yes, the sister at the back, and then the sister there, and the sister there. Yeah.
Great.
It's afternoon, isn't it? Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for that fantastic panel. I've definitely learned quite a lot today. Sorry, I'm supposed to introduce myself. My name is Folike Adebisi from the University of Bristol. I have two, I don't know if it's a point or a question. By the time I finish speaking, I'll leave everyone to decide for themselves. The first one, so I'm thinking about the African Charter. I think it's a fantastic thing. The idea of resetting African North research collaborations, I think, has the potential to radically change our reality. However, and these are my sort of point/questions are really about the small practical steps. Say, for example, within a university like Bristol, the distinction between, say, for example, someone who has a research teaching profile and a teaching profile, which academic is more embedded or it will be more engaged with the African Charter agenda? How do we ensure that we don't have an imbalance in how the African Charter is taken up by academics across the University of Bristol? My second point/question is about, again, a distinction between undergraduate, postgraduate, and postgraduate research. What are the practical steps that we can take to ensure that an agenda such as this, which is as it's described as transformative, doesn't pop up when people are doing research, but actually begins from the point at which students come into the university, or even before that? If we're thinking of ourselves as a civic university, how do we engage with, say, for example, schools within Bristol? And I'm using Bristol as an example because this is where I'm based, but I'm also interested in how people think about this on a broader local, national, and global scale. But how do we ensure that everyone is engaged with this transformative agenda? So
Thank you.
I think those are questions.
The sister on the right, and then sister on the left. Yep.
Hi, Agnes Nairn. I was introduced earlier. Thank you for that. I'm a professor of marketing and also the co-director of the Bristol Hub for Gambling Harms Research. I've just come back from the wonderful Pathfinder projects, where our role was to gather researchers from across Africa who are looking at the serious harms that are caused by gambling right across the continent. And one of the things that came up was citizen science. And I wanted to ask the panel what they thought the role of citizen science is in this new transformative research agenda. So we kept finding that people would say we need indigenous methodologies if we're going to actually impact gambling harms on the ground. We need input from lots and lots of different kinds of local groups and lots of different groups of citizens. So I just wondered where citizen science fits into the transformative research agenda.
Thank you very much. Sister there on the left.
Thank you. My name is Rachel James. I'm an associate professor in the School of Geographical Sciences here at Bristol. Thank you so much. It's a very thought-provoking panel. And what I was hearing a lot was around kind of, needing to engage, be a civic university to make ourselves more relevant. And in a lot of the work that I do with colleagues in African universities, I'm always so inspired by all that they're already doing to engage. Thinking of a colleague in Mozambique who advises the president, who works with the Ministry of Health, colleagues in Malawi who work on the national, because I'm a climate scientist, I should have said that, in this area of work, working on national climate change adaptation planning. And my colleagues in Kenya, many of them are kind of have a role between the university and the weather service, or even the regional weather service. And also in University of Cape Town, where I do more of the collaborating at the Africa Climate Development Initiative, Climate Systems Analysis Group, I'm constantly inspired by how kind of impactful their research is. And so, I wanted to hear a bit more from you as to whether, are these kind of outliers, or are there different sectors of society that we should be engaging more with? Or should it be done differently? because I think as well, I'm also inspired by Park and what Park has said about how, you know, wouldn't it be better if we were able to fund more pure research in African universities, right? Because a lot of the collaborations we have are funded by aid. And so there's a focus on poverty alleviation, there's a focus on impact, and actually doing the core research is also really, really important. And we need more funding for that. So I'm not sure exactly what my question is, but would love to hear more from you. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed for that. Now, I'm going to ask our panelists to respond to those 3 questions, points, by way of a final contribution to this discussion. But before I do that, I don't know about you all, but I always, at meetings, whenever I go to a meeting, at the end, and after we've left and the meeting's over, I wish I'd said, or I wish I'd asked. Do you ever get that feeling? Good. Now, this is your opportunity. We're having a quick brainstorming, very, very quickly. Just stand up, say it, and then we move to, yeah, there, quick.
This is what I wish I'd said. I'll say it to you. So I heard Faluka's question. I'm Tansy Jessup, Pro-Vice Chancellor for Education and Students here. So your question really resonates with me about how we do research and education in these partnerships. And I just want to give an example that is informal that I would hope you would advise how we could structure that more intentionally. I had coffee with Kate LaRue from Cape Town last week, and it landed up being a conversation where Katie was telling me how they were working on closing awarding gaps in Cape Town, and I'm hoping to continue that conversation so I can learn from her. So that's an educational issue here, and it's an example of practice, but it happened informally, and I wonder how we could structure those pedagogic conversations more strongly. So that's what I wish I'd said.
Good. Quick. Hands up, quick, your last chance. Okay, you had your chance. We're going to start with you, if you may, Mosa.
All right, thank you. Shoot, those are just when the conversation starts to be interesting. I think these are important questions around how do we actually bring action to this. And I think maybe because we are thinking and talking at a broader strategic level, that conversation has to continue. And I like the idea of having coffees to exchange on how we actually do this. I obviously have lots of thoughts around this, but I'll reserve those for now. I want to talk about this question of the fact that certain African universities are already engaged in this. And it is true. But if you were to ask me what our core function is at the University of Cape Town, I'll tell you teaching and learning, and I'll tell you research. Maybe I would say research and innovation, maybe. But that's it. I'll stop there. Yet there are so many people who are engaged in the societal mission that we don't acknowledge, we don't recognize, we don't reward. That's why Puleng was talking about the limited time that we also award to it. We don't talk about it, we don't communicate it, we don't capture it. Where is it included in our promotions criteria, for example? We want to know the number of your publications and how many students you supervised, and if you've graduated a PhD or not, and how many grants you've got. So we have to think about how to support that work better, how to scale it, how to ensure that the value chains of impact are clear and supported. And those value chains cannot be done only by the university. They need other partners. So I acknowledge that there is some colleagues. That's why I kept saying there are pockets and examples of people that are doing good work around this. But we have to make sure that we mainstream this work, we recognize it as part of our academic project. We don't. When I say what is our academic project, you're thinking research and teaching. You're not necessarily thinking about engagement or societal mission. And we're not even thinking about the bigger contribution to economic growth in terms of our value chains or even social innovation, or helping to build peace in our communities and democracy in our communities and so forth. We just engage in a scholarly manner. So I think that your question it's a fantastic question, but we cannot grow that work that has been necessitated by the challenges and the needs that are there on the ground. We cannot grow it if we don't necessarily institutionalize it and actually make sure that we consider and part of the academic project and we own it in that manner. I need to feel free to support and fund it as the Vice Chancellor of the university, but the resources are going to be mostly spent on the other things that we have historically prioritized. So I wanted to acknowledge your question and to say that it comes back to the question of how do we embed it? How do we embed this work into our day-to-day work, including how to engage in citizen science? Citizen science has often felt like we're giving up our power as the university or as researchers to people in the communities. But that's also when you realize you achieve empowerment and ownership by communities. But we have not necessarily made that the normal part of our academic endeavor, so to speak. Government comes to us and say, we have this question, can you answer it for us? We say, we'll answer it in 3, 4, or 5 years. They say, we need an answer today. We say, we are not agile enough to be able to provide you with an answer. And they say, well, we'll pay you money. We'll say, well, go speak to the consultants. So we can't continue to operate like that. The agility that Bristol aims for has to be a lived reality, not just an aspiration. So, but thank you for having me, and thank you for giving us an opportunity to share our thoughts.
Thank you indeed, Puleng.
Thank you. So there's one point that I would like to speak to, and hopefully then it also connects with others. And it's the point that was raised at the back around how within institutions as academics, we are differently situated, whether within research or research focus, and then tuition, more teaching focused. And what is the role of the African Charter in that regard? Because it seems to be leaning maybe towards more research. So what is the role of tuition and teaching? And I think that's a very important point, because I think the misconception of it focusing only on research is something perhaps that we need to have a conversation about, because when we're talking about collaborations and partnerships and within the research production ecosystem, what is research used for? What is it that you are teaching within the lecture hall? It's work that's based on research. You are drawing from a particular academic article, a book, a prescribed text, and that is based on research. So the question here, or the challenge, is that there has to be a rethinking in terms of the imbalances that are there within the research knowledge production ecosystem. And within that, when there's been a shift in that, that's going to trickle down to also what it is that we're teaching. So when the students were saying that the Euro-Western curriculum must fall, this is also part of that decolonial agenda, to say, how is the curriculum speaking to my lived realities, to what's happening in my community, to what's happening within the African continent, that we should not only rely on imported knowledges and imported theories. And so that is where tuition also comes in. So it's not just about research, or we're not looking at research as being divorced from tuition, that the two are actually intertwined. And this is at graduate level, in terms of the thesis that you're writing, the methodologies that you're using, the frameworks that you're using, to undergraduate level where you're introduced to whatever discipline that you're in, but also even further down to the schools, because I think the question was also about at what level are we thinking about this? And I think it's important to think about it from the basic education level all the way up to the tertiary education level. And at the core of it is research, because we cannot teach something that has not been researched, empirically proven, because what is it that we're teaching? So I think it's important to understand it at that level. And that's why at the core of it, we're centering the importance of scientific research knowledge production and how that ecosystem needs to shift. Because when that shifts, then everything else will then also be positively or impacted by it in terms of how we rethink knowledge in the work that we do.
Thank you very much for that.
I'll be brief. So when I arrived at the University of Bristol in September 2022, the first decision I had to make was whether or not the strategy for the whole university, which had been devised by my predecessor, now gone to Imperial College, which is also doing very well, and whether I would just say, oh, that was something, that was him, you know, all get rid of that one and we'll do a Welsh one now. But actually, it was a brilliant strategy, devised in consultation with the whole university, with the students who were around then. So I just rewrote the foreword to it and then said, right, now we'll take the 75 key performance indicators and we'll turn them into 10 and we will deliver on them. One of its geniuses, and I can take no credit for it, so I can call it a piece of genius, was to create the role that Michaela Kuta now holds, which Agnes held as the Pro-Vice Chancellor for Global and Civic Engagement, and to put it on 3 pillars: research and innovation, education and student success, and global and civic engagement. So a 3-legged stool, which you required all 3 legs to work together. We certainly haven't done it perfectly, but I am proud that we have some of our civic partners in the room with us today, because you actually have to start by listening. And then by offering the expertise that you have, which can be quite surprising. Somebody, it's a bit like being a GP. Somebody comes in saying, oh, I've got a bad back. And actually it turns out that they're getting divorced and they need a completely different kind of offer than what you were originally planning to do. So a genuine partnership, learning to listen and learning to problem solve for the real world in real time together, without also keeping an eye on 50 years from now, 100 years from now, and 150 years from now. I suppose, being a historian, I don't really believe in the divide between pure research and applied research. It's just research. And someone someday will say we were all wrong and try to overthrow our ideas. And that's great. So thank you, Paul.
No, thank you, Evelyn. Thank all 3 of our outstanding academic leaders and activists. Let's give them a round. Thank you. Thank you very, very much. And as I take away from them and from all your contributions, not just what you've said, but what you are doing in your work, what I take away from this and about the Charter is that it's not just what we say when it comes to engagement and societal change. It's what we do, yes, it's what we count and what we reward. Yes. What we count and what we reward. And there's a wonderful phrase, which I'm sure Mosa and Puleng, you know very well, that comes from the Xhosa and the Zulu language around self-reliance and action. And that phrase, whether it's in relation to Somaliland or all the other things that you're thinking of doing, and you're thinking about how do you take forward engagement and societal change, and that word is simply this: Vikuzenze. Vikuzenze, which means, doesn't it, just get up, get out there, wake up and do it. Pickles and they. Over to you now.
Biku Zenze. That will be, we'll open every university meeting with that.
Well, no, it's just a chance to say thanks again to Lord Paul for bringing the spirit in that. A big thanks to Mosa and Puleng and the teams for making the whole trip. There's tea and coffee at the back so that you've got a bit of a chance to talk and chat to each other. We were particularly keen, in fact, the team, and a triple thank you to the park team because they've done a lot of work on this. Just a chance for everyone to get to know each other if you haven't gotten to know each other. So we're really keen to have a bit of space for that. I'm just going to go on the linguistic theme, completely riffraffing. It's not on the script. Just off of what Mosa said at the beginning, the "we see you" expression. In my dialect, there is an expression that translates loosely terribly in English as "we see you," ci vediamo, which means two things at the same time, and we say it at the end. We say ci vediamo in the sense of we understand each other, we now see each other through having met, but it also has a meaning of commitment to see each other, not just to give each other a phone call, write a letter, which is typically what your mom, if you're Italian, tells you, as in they want you to come back home. It's a commitment and it's a statement of understanding. And I think it's an important point to stress for those of you who don't see a bit of the behind the scenes. On the top of this, a 30-minute the team at Park and the teams of the three universities are meeting each other, are devising ways to get together and do more together. They're going at great pains in the current circumstances, to be fair, and the complexity of doing international engagements. We're really thinking through how we do this more and better. So for me, it's a ci vediamo next. In fact, ci vediamo in a few minutes. The next meeting, and to everyone else, please get to know each other. If you don't, please reach out. And thanks again for the fun. Thanks, Evelyn.
Thank you.
Well done. I want to shake your hand.